Okay, well, greetings jukebox fans, welcome to part 2. It's been a couple of days since I did the last video and not a great deal's changed. One thing I have done is remove the wooden lid off the top of this thing to move it to one side, because this thing, one of the gas struts, or some sort of spring-loaded thing that holds it together, it kept collapsing, so it'll hold its own weight. Now I've taken the wooden lid off it, so it's a bit easier to work with. The next job, well, let's explain what's going through my head at the moment. I'm very tempted just to plug it in like a big kid and see what happens, but the more grown-up bit of me is saying probably not a good idea, because when I tried it 10 years ago it didn't really do much then, and I'm sure it has improved with age. The play relay is missing, the credit unit's missing, nothing's going to happen, so let's not plug it in just yet. What I'm thinking is to start with the mechanism and work up from there, and obviously the beginning of the mech begins with the motors. And if it's anything like the old Rock-Ola I've repaired before, the motor that ran the carriage needed stripping down and rebuilding. There was a problem with the commutator brushes, all that malarkey. So I think the first job is to get the motors off the carousel and the gripper. We'll check the motors, see what kind of state they're in. It also makes it a bit easier to have a look at the actual mech itself and see just how badly gummed up it is without the motor in play. So, gonna have a go taking it to bits. So here's the mech in all its glory, and the first thing I'm going to be looking at is right down there in the middle there. That is the motor that runs the gripper. If I just bring the light a bit closer, you can just see there's a little gear wheel that comes out the end of it that runs this bigger gear that runs the gripper mechanism. Now it's a lot easier to fiddle with the gripper if the motor's not connected, so I think the first thing to do is see if we can unbolt that motor. Now I've had a look in the schematics. It looks simple enough to get at. From what I can tell, it's undo that little bolt there and not a great deal more, and the motor should come out. So with my trusty spanner at the ready, let's see how we get on with this. Oh, helps if you put the ratchet set the right way. There we go. So if we undo that, the schematics suggest it's just the one bolt, but that seems a bit unlikely to me. And sure enough, it ain't budging an inch. I think there's two others at the bottom there. I think if I undo all three of those, it should come apart. Let's find out. Just removed the turntable platter to make a bit of room for myself, and sure enough, you undo those two bottom bolts and the whole thing's ready to pop out. Just need to sort of wangle it through the hole past that bit of wire. Not going to pop out. Okay, so I got the motor out, just took the right angle to fit it through the hole. Disconnects there. There's a little control box just underneath the platter where that plugs in. But anyway, with the motor out the way, we can have a closer look at the gripper mech. When there's no motor connected to it, you can just grab hold of this cog and turn the whole mech by hand, and what should happen is that the piston will pop out there to grab the record, and then it should lift up and place it on the deck. But what you actually get is it goes so far and it just meets nothing but resistance in either direction. I'm not sure which direction actually makes it reject. It's probably that way, but I can put one into it. Either way, you can hear it knocking, and that knocking you can hear is that gear down the bottom here trying to mesh with these, and they are absolutely seized up solid, as was predicted, because that's what always goes wrong with old Rock-Olas. So the next job is going to be pop that pin out there. Then all this plunger mechanism starts to come apart, and you can take the whole, eventually get the whole gripper unit out. And once you get the piston out of there, you can degrease it and re-lubricate it, and it should fix the problem. So that's the next job. Okay, so it's the next day now. I've had a few spare hours in the afternoon. As you can see, I've managed to remove the gripper thing. Now that was a job and a half. So it just sits in the middle there. There's a little pin that you have to bash out here. I didn't film this because there's a few guys on the internet that have done this already. If you have a look on YouTube, there's somebody that shows exactly how you take this gripper mech out. And the biggest challenge was getting that pin out, because it was stuck in fast, and then I sort of jamming screwdrivers and things in and bashing with a hammer, and then it got stuck. But lots of WD-40 and banging and crashing later, I finally got it out. So we can finally clean it up a bit now. Here's the offending items then. You've got the gripper bow here. That's the plunger that goes in and out to grip the record. That was seized up completely solid, but in the process of banging and crashing trying to get the pin out, this actually did free up. But the bit that's really been the issue is this thing here. Now that little sleeve that spins inside there, somehow that causes that plunger to move in and out, and while the plunger was free, this thing was absolutely solid, and it's in the process of getting out. Of course, it has freed it up a bit because it's all covered in WD-40 where I was trying to free it up, but of course WD is not a cure for the problem, it's just a temporary fix, so it was just a way of getting it apart so I can strip this all back, clean all the gunge and hardened grease that's on it, re-lube it and put it back together, and hopefully, if I can remember how it goes back together, it should work nicely. Right, that's the gripper bits all degreased now. There was some nasty gunge inside that, but it's all cleaned off now. Better have a go at the bearings on the deck itself. Yeah, that's the two bearings that it holds into, so we'll just get a bit of foam cleaner in there. It's a mucky job, but hopefully it should work a bit better now. Clean that inside of the bearing out, don't have any of that gunge left. Yeah, you can see there's some crap in there. Get all that out. I'll give all this a bit of a clean up before I put the arm back on it. Right, so that's everything cleaned up now, so it's all ready to go back in. We just need to lubricate it. Now, I don't know if this is really the right thing for the job, but this is just some sort of machine oil. It might be a bit light for the job, but we'll give it a go anyway. So I just want to make sure there's plenty of oil all over the bits, the movie bits. There we go, I'll get plenty of that on there. You can't really use too much of the stuff, you can always wipe it off after. So it may want some sort of grease on it, but I'm not too concerned because the idea is that once I get the mech working, eventually when I build the new cabinet for the jukebox, all this is coming apart again, because the idea is to spray all this. The silver bits will get done in silver hammerite, and other bits of the mechanism will be sprayed black, so it'll be a nice sort of black and silver, attractive looking visible mech. That's the idea anyway. I've got a bit of oil on that, get a bit in there, there we go, give it a good slosh around, and with a bit of luck, oh yes, smooth as butter. So let's do that to the rest of it. Okay, kept much later in the evening. I've got it all back together, and I think after a lot of trial and error I've got it working now. So that's the gear that the motor attaches to, so I can just turn this by hand to try it. So let's simulate a record going on. We turn that, it's gripping, it's lifting, it's turning, it's laying down. If I turn it a bit harder, and there we go, that's in its play cycle now, so that would eventually make it to the end there. So to put the record back, it's just literally the motor goes backwards. So if I turn that, the needle picks up, and in she goes. Releases the record and mark switch goes click and system switches off. Happy days, we're getting somewhere. Right, so that's the actual gripper up and running now. We need time to turn our attentions to this little motor. This is the gripper motor, so this sits in there, this little thing turns around and attaches to the bigger wheel that you just saw. It's got a little knurly bit at the end that you can turn by hand, and if you try it, it does turn, and it's as stiff as old boots. So I'm thinking that if I plug this into the jukebox, once we get the play relay and the credit unit and everything sorted, all that's going to happen is it's either going to burn the motor out, pop a fuse, or pop out one of the circuit breakers. So either way, I need to open this up and see what's going on inside. So yeah, it's a nice simple design. There's not much to not much of a trick to dismantling it. There's a couple of screws on the back here, another one there. Let's pull those two screws out, there we go. And then in theory, the back of this should just pop open. He says, trying to be gentle with a screwdriver. I think that's starting to give. There we go. And gently does it. She's open. Now, first thing you notice, that's done some hours. There's a lot of sort of sooty carbon stuff, presumably left over from deteriorating carbon brushes inside the motor. So I think we need to do a bit more dismantling, see what state the brushes are in, and if a bit of lubrication is needed. Okay, let's got the whole motor apart now. This is filthy dirty, very dark. I hope that's just carbon deposits from brushes, not the fact that it's burnt up. Because I've never actually seen this Juki around. For all I know, this motor could be shagged already. But looks to me like there's some life left in the brushes anyway. There's definitely some carbon left there. And you can see there, that's a sort of screwdriver on the end, which obviously goes into this gearbox bit. So the screwdriver must attach to another gear inside there that there's a reduction gear. All clever stuff, but we're going to give it a bit of a clean up anyway. Okay, so 24 hours later, and it's time for another status update. While we did get the gripper mechanism working all right, the motor proved to be a lot more trouble than I first thought it was going to be. For a start, one of the wires broke off the where the brushes are wired on. I had to strip both those back and resolder them, and the grommet was missing as well, so I've done the best I could here with a bit of tape just to hold it in place. But even after I cleaned it all out and done what I needed to do with it and get it electrically right, it was still as stiff as all hell. And you could still barely turn this even after I cleaned it and greased everything. The problem ended up being, if you undo this little thing here, there's like a plastic nylon wheel, and the end of the motor shaft is like a little screw worm drive. And it appeared that the actual angle of the motor shaft was pressing too hard against the gear wheel, which was causing it to bind up, because if you moved the gear wheel up a bit with the cover off, it freed up fine. The gear wheel would turn, the motor would spin, no problem. But as soon as you put it back where it was supposed to be, it wouldn't have it. And I was scratching my head on this for hours until I eventually realised, pretty much by accident, that when you undid these two screws, this is what joins the actual gearbox to the motor body. If you slacken that off, all of a sudden it freed up, which I thought was a bit odd. But I've done a little bodge. I don't know if you can see this. You see there's a little washer. I've just bodged that into the side of the case so that this side of it doesn't quite line up with the motor body like it should do. See, on that side it's a nice tight seam, but I've deliberately wedged this open slightly, and just having that slight angle, and we're talking fractions of a millimetre, it just means that that motor shaft inside there is just very slightly away from the gear wheel, and it's just enough to make it work properly. So I can turn the back end of it by hand now, and it feels nice and smooth like it should. It's had some lubrication. So the next thing to do is to actually see if it works. It feels like it should. When I wired this up before, just out of curiosity to see what happened, it was pulling about 2 amps and barely turning at all, whereas it does feel a lot freer now. So I'm hoping we should get a reasonable reading on the ammeter, hopefully not too much. We've got my bench supply there, just supplying, well, just under 28 volts, which is what the motor needs. I've got it clipped up to the connections on the motor, but running it via an ammeter just so I can see what it's pulling. And if it's still trying to suck 2 amps, then that's too much, and then there's definitely a problem with it. I'm hoping it's going to be well under an amp, otherwise it's just going to keep popping the circuit breakers whenever you put the jukebox on. So we have that wire that goes to the motor, and then we've got the other end of the multimeter right there. So when I touch those two, it should make things work. So I just need to switch the power supply on. Okay, we have power. Let's, there we go. Fingers crossed. Yeah, it's running, and the ammeter says just over half an amp. That works for me. Half an amp, I can live with that. I think the jukebox will as well. Successful, I'd say repair. It's more of a dirty bodge with that washer stuck in the side of it, but it does mean it works at least. Bodge ahoy. And that's it all bolted back into place. So we have a newly refurbished gripper arm and the motor that drives it, all looking rather shiny compared to the rusty, dirty mess that is the rest of the Mac. The question is, now I've done that, what do I work on next? Take your pick, there's plenty to do. I think next up I might have a closer look at the selection wheel here, because you can pretty much guarantee that those wipers and those contacts down there, they're going to be filthy dirty and not making proper contact. We've got one of the write-in relays, there's a bit of broken plastic here somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but I remember seeing it. And then of course we've got the switch gear up here that's all going to want a bit of service hole and cleaning on the various contacts and switch breakers that we've got there. So I think that'll be the next job, and hopefully by the time I've done all that, my play relay will have turned up in the post, and then we'll have a go at putting a credit unit in, and hopefully we can try powering it up and see what it does.